another day, another incident that happens on the internet with people who are completely unhinged, getting involved in things they shouldn't be talking about, and observing no true fatal consequences whatsoever. Let's go. So, with the revised version of X-Men, the animated series, or going to be referred to as X-Men 97, is going to be like the continuation of the somewhat cancelled / rushed ending to the original run of the X-Men in the 90s. And they've made the effort to address the character of Morph as being non-binary. And naturally, the internet goes ballistic. Or rather, people go ballistic from the point of view by saying it's just woke people thinking they can get their voice in and saying that every character has to be different sexually, or every blah, blah, blah. It's the most unhinged, completely backwards logic inducing things you can imagine. I, however, will say this. From a writer's perspective, if I was going to make a character where I would explicitly lay out what their sexual identity was, because listen, the X-Men, and I've heard this comment on Twitter, that the X-Men was devised as specifically people who were viewed as people from the outside, and mutants were seen as frowned upon or almost alien species, which culminated in what real life civil rights movements that were happening during the publication of the Uncanny X-Men back in the early 60s. And yes, I know there's obviously the paradigm of Professor X is meant to be a stand-in for Martin Luther King, whilst Magneto is meant to be a stand-in for Malcolm X. So themes of prejudice, themes of being opposed, civil rights, liberties, obediences, and stuff like that. These are themes that have been constant within the X-Men for 60 years. But I will say this again: if these things were all prevalent and present all the way back in the 60s, there's no reason why they can't be prevalent or worth mentioning today. Iceman, for example, was, I think, I can't necessarily remember what year they decided to make him gay in canon, but it still happens and stuff like that. And I think it was it the character Destiny, I think, as well, was came out as a lesbian. And bear in mind, Charles Xavier's son, Legion, is described as having a plethora of mental disorders, conditions, and they even did a short live action series about him, which, if you didn't know, well, there you go. But again, getting back to what I said about Morph, is that if it was in any way relevant to what was going to be happening in the show, I would have no issue with this whatsoever, and literally we could just move on. But then again, you have to, that there has always been, like, in my opinion as a writer, there's been a worrying display of writers or a production team saying things about characters just so they can say, oh, by the way, they are this, that, and the other. We don't actually have to, what's the golden rule when it comes to writing? Show, don't tell. And if that becomes obvious, then that's it. That's the thing. We didn't need Steven Hillenburg to tell us that SpongeBob SquarePants was asexual. That's pretty obvious. He doesn't have any sexual like partners or relationships of that manner that might lead to more romantic interests. I don't think that was ever the intention going in, and I'm absolutely fine with that. And it didn't need to be like that anyway. But when it comes to back to the X-Men again, I'm always in the space, ladies and gentlemen, where if it's not relevant whatsoever, don't bother mentioning it. Don't put it in. And again, show, don't tell. Don't tell your audience, because you're going to be running the risk of saying to the audience, you are going to listen to what we are going to say, and therefore that is the right answer. And besides, again, I say relevancy because do you remember 11 years ago when Rebecca Sugar, before she was working on Steven Universe, she wrote several episodes of Adventure Time that basically alluded to Princess Bubblegum and Marceline the Vampire Queen previously going out with each other, and how this also created a little bit of buzz online, and how it was made canon by Pendleton Ward back in 2015, and they actually concluded the original run of the show by having Marceline and Bubblegum get back together. I mean, yes, but bear in mind, ladies and gentlemen, the show only ever alluded to this being the case. It never outright stated that these two were in that sort of relationship. Although, to be honest, towards the end of the show, it was mostly undeniable about what their relationship was. But again, that's fine, because if that was canon to the show, and again, show don't tell, that's absolutely fine as well. So I can forgive Adventure Time on this point of view. But again, going back to the X-Men, if it's going to make any impact to the story at all, then that's fine. If you're going to do it in a very nuanced and a very, very interesting or way that actually reflects maybe an aspect that perhaps we never saw out of the X-Men before, that's absolutely fine as well. So again, if that's what they're going to do and that's just how it's going to be, then again, I have no issue with these sorts of things whatsoever. What I do have an issue with is the habit people have of writing characters that are going to be a certain way just as a way to add brownie points. It's people doing it like it's the intentions of it are obvious, but they are not doing it for good reasons, is the way I can say it. Which is good. Again, it depends entirely on how you see it. This is only my opinion as a writer, but I would not write a character to, have something that would only ever appeal or win over the support of some people and then just absolutely doing nothing with it. Because who's to say that X-Men 97 goes off without a hitch, Morph is in it, and he doesn't really do anything that would reflect his non-binary status? What if it's just like one of those marketing stunts that just gets people to watch it, like the current news that's going on revolving around WrestleMania 40? What if it's just for publicity? Well, if that was the case, then why did they decide to advertise it during the Super Bowl this year? It was the most viewed telecast of all time, and what are we meant to think about it now? So, for what it's worth, ladies and gentlemen, just calm down about the X-Men for 1 second, or about things that don't really matter. But at the same time, I just want to know if this actually leads to anything, if it does anything unique, nuanced, and stuff like that. Well, there's only one way to find out. I might actually have to watch X-Men 97. But I first think I should watch the whole of the original X-Men anyway, because I love the X-Men anyway, and it would be a good way to be refreshed on certain things. Mind you, if they thought people were getting mad about a non-binary character in a revised version of a cartoon from the 90s, imagine how people are going to think when there's an entire scene in X-Men where Magneto literally threatens to commit genocide and force Charles Xavier to walk through the apocalypse or the Holocaust just to get him to prove his point that all humans need to be exterminated. So yeah, imagine if you think the idea of Morph being non-binary is going to blow people's minds. Oh dear. And that's not even getting into the comics. Oh dear, oh dear.